I am on our school's POM team. We have like a summer camp, and we were on a break, and we were talking about ChatGPT. And they had no clue how much energy it used up and how bad it was for the environment. And I was telling them that, and they're like, okay, but like, I still don't get it. Like, how is this thing in my hand bad for the environment? And I was like, oh, guys. And I went on, and then we went back to class, and then they were telling our teachers and our coaches about it. And then I had to tell them too. And it was this big thing. They're like, wow, you're so wise. But it did make me feel better because now they know.
That was Alyson Dennie, a high school student from Piedmont, Oklahoma. Really, it's remarkable to hear young people talking about these things. They know so much, and I think we forget that sometimes. We think that, high schoolers are so focused on their own social lives. They're already citizens engaged in a lot of things,
I got to talk to Allie, and I had such an enjoyable time. And you're right, Ariana, like hearing her talk about her thoughts on ChatGPT and the role that our daily lives play in the wider climate context was really interesting and invigorating. And I feel really lucky to do it. So shout out to Allie, who, I'll flex for her for a second. She's on the green team, which does park cleanups and other kinds of projects. Plus, she is the drum major, and she is on the POM team. She's very busy. Really appreciate her taking the time to chat with us. And that's what we're talking about today, is going back to school and what that means in the climate context. I'm Kushan Avidar.
I'm Ariana Brocious, and this is Climate One. Labor Day is over, summer is ending, and all over the country, kids are headed back to school.
That's right. Sharpened pencils, packed lunches, school buses on the road, the bell that goes off in the classroom at 7:15, then 7:25, then 7:30. I used to be a high school math teacher, so there are very visceral things that come back to my mind when I think of back to school.
I was going to say, you sound really agitated by the bell.
I did not like the bell. But there are many other things that I liked. Meeting new students, meeting new parents, getting to talk about triangles. I love 30, 60, 90 triangles. There's a lot that is there. A lot of challenges, too.
Right. And in addition to the usual challenges of a new school year, teachers across the country are trying to figure out how to talk about climate disruption in their classes. And in some cases, if they even should talk about it.
Yeah, especially in this political climate, if you'll excuse the pun. Human-caused global warming can be tricky to talk about in schools.
But it's really important to talk about because it's taking a real toll on young people. According to a survey in The Lancet, 60% of young people described themselves as very or extremely worried about climate change.
Clearly, there is quite a bit here for students, parents, and teachers all to deal with.
So today we're going to talk about what it's like for teachers to bring climate into the classroom, how adults can help kids deal with the emotions related to the climate crisis, and how teachers can make climate a part of their lesson plans.
Margaret Wang-Aghania is executive director and co-founder of SubjectToClimate. It's an organization that creates resources and lesson plans for teachers who want to teach climate in their classrooms. She talked to our colleague Austin Colon about this aha moment she had when she was an economics teacher.
Every year, the externalities and market failure unit was the hardest to teach. It's one of those abstract concepts that students just didn't understand. They were like, okay, I don't get it. Mm-hmm. You're just moving a graph around. And it wasn't until I had a particular student who actually was repeating a social studies course, and she needed to pass this class. And she didn't see herself as an economist. This didn't make sense. But what she did care about was a lot of the injustices she was seeing. And specifically, she was also very concerned about animal welfare and rights. So we talked about the cost of meat, and we did this whole video about what is the true cost of meat, because you're paying very little for that burger that you are buying from McDonald's. Does it truly cost that much? And we started getting into that, and then it became a light bulb moment where I understood externalities is everywhere, and sustainability isn't a separate issue. It's a lot of what makes these concepts come to life. And I am happy to say that, by the way, she ended up thinking about how do we change people's behavior after knowing about market failure, and started doing these campaigns at school. And she did pass the class too. So that was like an aha moment for me where like, well, here's something from my personal life that I can bring in, not because it's an extra burden, but because it helps my students understand a concept more concretely.
That's an amazing story. I mean, yeah, when people can connect to a concept in that personal way, that really does drive home, not only the lesson you're teaching, but the real world applications. And I come from a family of educators, and my mother is a music educator specifically. And so when I was looking on SubjectToClimate's website, I was really excited to see that there were music lessons that incorporate climate themes. And that can be tricky with the arts to have climate in those lessons. So how do lessons like that get developed?
Yeah, so having an educator background, one of the points of views I come in with is that teachers know what work in the classroom the best. Teachers are experts. And
Right.
oftentimes when we're trying to figure out education solutions, for some reason, we don't ask teachers. We don't see what teachers are doing. We come with an asset deficit mindset where like, we need more resources to do X, Y, and Z. Let's bring in experts and consultants, when I see it as we have these wonderful teachers. So the issue was that they just don't have enough time.
Mm.
So what we did was we started looking at teachers who are already experts, because they're classroom teachers, in math, in English, in social studies, in music, like the music lesson that you saw. And we did simple training on basics on climate and asked them to think about, how does it connect to the topics you already teach? And then we work with them to create a lesson plan. Oftentimes they just don't have time to do like, let me make it into a lesson plan and create these slideshows that is usable for everybody else. As a teacher, I only had the time to create lesson plans for myself.
Yeah.
So then we started training cohorts of teachers, taking their lesson plans, working with them, and then doing the publication aspects of it. So just amplifying the amazing work that they're already doing in their class.
Mm-hmm. And do those lessons that the teachers develop, do they get checked by any scientists to make sure that the climate portion that they're incorporating is accurate?
Yeah. So we do have a scientist task force that also relieves our teachers of, sometimes it's just intimidating, like, okay, I am a music teacher, or I'm an English teacher. I've
Right.
never been taught about climate change. And yes, I did this basic training, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we let the teachers know that there's a review process, and we have a scientist task force reviewing all of the lessons that the teachers create.
And could you give us just a brief overview of like one of those lessons, maybe for one of the music lessons?
Yeah, all of our lessons have a similar framework. We do what is called the 3 I's. So we always start with the inquiry. Inquire is the first step. So where students are noticing, wondering, and thinking, and developing curiosity. And then the second I is investigation. This is where you're learning your disciplinary concept and tools. In this case, it's music. And then you're using that tool to start to answer your inquiry. And the third step is inspire. This is really important because you don't want to just teach students a problem and then go like, okay, well, have fun solving it. We don't want to leave students with climate anxiety. Therefore, the inspire section is like, okay, now what are you going to do about it? Or, because we don't want the burden to be just on them, what are other people doing about it? So then I can walk you through the lesson plans. You specifically were talking about the music lesson. This one is about legato and staccato, right?
Right, yeah.
So the first step in the inquiry is actually thinking about how expressing an idea musically is different from expressing the same idea with words. So it's a discussion. They're starting to think and explore, and they're noticing. And then the second thing is like, oh, let's investigate how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually listen to 2 movements by a climate composer and look at how legato and staccato represents climate impacts. So this is where they're learning what is legato, what is staccato, and they're investigating some of the earlier questions they had, like why would one choose to express in music rather than in words?
And for somebody who may not know, legato is when a note lingers for a long time or a longish time, and staccato is very short notes.
Yes, exactly. And, they're learning the musical effects of why you would leverage legato versus staccato.
Right.
When would you use it? Why would you use it? And this is something you would learn in music anyways.
I wish I had something like that when I was in high school, because that sounds like a lot of fun. And what would you say to teachers who might be kind of skeptical about the need for introducing climate outside of the science classroom?
I would say that if it were a science problem and just a science problem, we would have solved this already.
Right.
We have all the technology, all the the data out there. We know what we need to do, and we have to do it, but we haven't done it. So if we continue to do the same thing that we're doing, which is we'll barely talk about it, but if we only talk about it, we treat it as a science concept, then we're not going to solve the problem. This is a mindset shift. It's a cultural shift, and that's why it touches all subjects. We need English to communicate. We need English to understand what is misinformation out there and what isn't. We need social studies to understand movements, economics to understand trade-offs and incentives. We need art, just like in music, to communicate and build movements. It hasn't worked to just teach it in science.
Right. There are some real difficulties that teachers are running up against. One I notice is that, climate data is being removed from government websites. And what kind of impact has that had on teachers trying to get accurate information for their lessons?
Yeah, so we see it firsthand. A lot of the lesson plans that the teachers have created that we talked about leverage a lot of federal data, climate data, and that's one indication because those are lessons that represent what they're teaching in the classroom. And a lot of those links were broken at some point, so we had to actually go and find replacement information and data. We're a nonprofit and this is our role, right? But for a lot of teachers, unfortunately, the biggest issue teachers face is that they just don't have enough time. And I remember that being the case when I was a teacher. So if this was a lesson that I was going to teach and I don't have that data set anymore, I'll likely just teach something else because I don't have that time to go and find that data.
Teachers are always pressed for time. I remember that when I was growing up. My mother would say the same
Yeah.
thing. We just not enough hours in the day. What professional development do you offer teachers who want to be more well-versed in climate issues?
Yeah, SubjectToClimate, we see ourselves as the one-stop shop just to make it easier for whatever a teacher needs at any point of their journey in teaching about climate, all grade levels and all subjects. That looks differently in professional development. So just like we aggregate resources, we also aggregate professional development. There are some teachers who prefer to enroll in a course that you get credit for. There are some that don't have the time and just want to read articles on how they may approach climate change. So we have that as well. Asynchronous modules, live classes, live sessions in person. So we have aggregated those opportunities. We also have developed our own asynchronous modules where there's level 0, which is our the fundamentals of climate change. Level 1 is how do I integrate it into across subjects and grade levels. And level 2 is how do I create my own lesson plan. So we have that as well. And if you take it, you can actually submit your homework, as you will say, to the NEA, the National Education Association, and get a micro-credential to honor your work of taking the time and effort to learn about climate change and climate education.
Well, that's really cool. And I hope that students and teachers use those resources when they get a chance and become more well-versed and connected with the climate issue that we're all facing. Margaret Wang-Aghania is Executive Director and co-founder of Subject-to-Climate. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us on Climate One.
Yep. Thank you so much, Austin.
Coming up, how the grown-ups in kids' lives can help navigate feelings like climate anxiety.
Parents need to be there and honest and validate feelings and reality, but not overwhelm kids.
That's up next when Climate One continues.
In addition to juggling homework and tests and navigating friendships, many kids nowadays are dealing with the fact that the climate crisis is altering their future.
My name is Dennie. I am a high school senior in Piedmont, Oklahoma. My dad is in the oil and gas industry, and he's always taught me that the changing of climate is something that's normal and that's supposed to happen. And so I've never really been scared of the change in itself, but I think it's the speed and the rate at which things are changing that makes me feel kind of helpless, because I know that I'm doing my part, but not everybody knows what their part can be. And so it's like, what can really change? I wish that more people knew that every single thing that they do impacts our world, like either positively or negatively. It does have an impact.
Hi, my name's Leah Christenson. I'm a senior at Piedmont High School and I'm 17 years old. I feel, one, a little uncomfortable about the fact of climate change, and one, a little bit mad. I don't like the idea of change. I like the idea of things staying the same. And so when things happen to disrupt and cause change, it makes me feel uncomfortable. And the whole mad situation, whenever people are ignorant to what they're doing, that's why I get kind of mad. I'm not sure how I deal with that. I'm still trying to figure that out, because it just bottles up inside me sometimes, and then I have little outbursts. So I'm not really sure how I should deal with that at the moment. My best way I can I'm really trying to figure that out with so far is just educating people, because I really feel like it just comes down to people being uneducated about it. Because if I feel like if people knew more, then they wouldn't act the way they do.
These feelings can be overwhelming to anyone, regardless of age. But kids aren't in this alone. To find out how to best help young people navigate their climate-related mental health issues, I spoke with Robin Cooper, co-founder and president of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance.
So I think that kids are feeling a lot of distress about what they know about the impacts of climate change and the enormity of what they're feeling. And their feelings are across a whole variety of spectrums, particularly for teens, but younger kids also. They're feeling a lot of anxiety. They're feeling dread. They're feeling fear. And they're feeling a sense of doom and hopelessness. Will there be a world that I will grow into? For little kids, is the world going to die? Am I going to die? For teens, will there be a world that's a viable place for me to live in the future? Could I have children in the future? What will my future be? And a lot of doom and feelings of hopelessness. They feel a lot of anger and betrayal. Betrayal that the grown-ups in their world have left them with these burdens and not protected them. And a lot of sadness and grief about what they're seeing.
That's a lot.
It's a whole lot for young people to have on their shoulders. Really a lot.
And they're not wrong. I think I'm not a young person. I have feelings, similar feelings, which we'll get into kind of the adult version of this in a minute. But from what you've observed, on average, how well equipped are the adults in young people's lives to handle these problems?
Well, it depends on who the adults are. And I'm going to call it the parent club. Those grown-ups that are beyond just their parents, their grandparents, their teachers, their coaches, their aunts and uncles. It's very variable, and it depends on how connected those grown-ups are to the worries about climate change, whether those grown-ups have been able to face their own worries and deal with them in effective ways so that they're not overwhelming. So it's widely variable, but I think the grown-ups, that parent club, need a lot of help in managing to guide their kids through this tough terrain.
Yeah. I like the term grown-ups to imply that there are a lot of responsible adults in children's lives. It's not strictly a parent-child relationship, and that a lot of adults can influence and help kids navigate all kinds of things. So how can adults who themselves have climate anxiety address this issue with the children in their lives? Should they handle it first themselves? Should they model for the children the struggle of dealing with it? What are some of the ways they can try to do that?
Well, I think grown-ups have a big responsibility to help kids navigate this. And first, they have to be understanding what the real world issues are and also be enough connected to managing their own climate anxiety so it doesn't exaggerate or spill over to what the kids are burdened with. They have to be able to guide them with things that they are also doing so that kids don't feel abandoned and alone in managing this. That's kind of being partners with them. And you've also said how important it is to think about beyond just parents. Teenagers, particularly developmentally, are navigating separating from their parents. And sometimes then the ever-present tensions between parents and teenagers need to be considered in that mix, and sometimes engagement with others than just parents. But that does not diminish the very important role of parents being attentive, alert, and with their kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is similar to so many other kinds of parental advice, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about when you're maintaining boundaries, for example. You can still be there, sit with your kid, still say no. You can be kind, you can still say no. So I hear that kind of being able to be there with your kids, not dismiss, not glaze over or gloss over their very real concerns, and then try to give them some, I suppose, age-appropriate answers. I mean, that feels tricky. You know, I've dealt with this a bit in my own life so far, and sometimes it's hard to know how much a kid can take of the real truth that we're struggling with as adults.
I think you've mentioned two particular things that I want to highlight that I'm so in agreement with you about. First is that the issues around climate distress and the threats that we're experiencing and teens and kids grappling with this is laid on normal developmental relationships as they grow. And that's true with teens and their relationships with grown-ups. But they're separating, but they're also not there yet. So they still have a component that very much needs parents to be involved and protective. And the other is how to navigate appropriate, developmentally attuned responses about information. Sometimes I think grown-ups tend to think of kids as little grown-ups and talk to them in language that is way too complicated, not adhering to the reality that kids bring in information in developmentally appropriate ways. So little kids are very concrete, and teenagers are beginning to understand in a more nuanced ways, but still see things in overwhelming ways. So parents need to be there and honest and validate feelings and reality, but not overwhelm kids, and know that sometimes what they say can just go right over their head if they're talking in too abstract ways.
Right. And you've just touched on a key component of all this, which is trust, right? And building that trust, continuing to maintain that. So when we spoke earlier, you described how your father talked to you about the threat of nuclear war, not climate, but also a very scary, scary threat when you were a child. So can you share that story?
It's a story that guides my thinking now, and it's very personal. As you mentioned, it was at the time when this other existential threat was coming into my consciousness. As a kid, I was little, maybe I was 7-ish or so, and it was the time of nuclear weapons development and a lot of international conflict. And I asked my father, Would I die in a nuclear war, or would there be a nuclear war? And he said, absolutely no, this will not happen in your lifetime. I was enormously relieved at my, 7-year-old mind. And my father did right by protecting me. But later, when I was an advocate to eliminate nuclear conflict, I was in my mid-20s, maybe. And I said to my father, how could you tell me that? How could you tell me that? It's just not true. You don't know. And he said to me, Robin, what was I going to do? You were a little kid. My father held the position of knowing he had to protect me from overwhelming catastrophic feelings. But what he didn't do, and what I would now do and tell him, is that he didn't validate my concerns. He didn't say, yes, this is a very big concern. I'm concerned too. He didn't then say, we can do things about this and we can do things together in facing what is really a true thing. And he didn't help me then to see the nuances that I could tolerate even at that age. And that guides me to think about how grown-ups can be with kids, validating, being with them, but also protecting them from the enormity of the risk that can't be grappled with when you're that little.
Well, okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Let's give parents and teachers, who we haven't really talked about much yet, a little bit of a guide to help address the psychological health of children and students in this situation. So how would you help a parent or teacher identify in the first place that a child is struggling with something like climate anxiety or grief?
It's a really good question. What do you notice and what do you see? Watching to see if they are stalled in appropriate developmental tasks, the things that they should be achieving at the stage and age that they're in. Are they able to involve themselves in schoolwork? Are they able to involve themselves with friends? Are they still experiencing or not pleasure in things that they used to get pleasure from? And that's a big thing to watch for. Are they retreating away from those places of engagement that are appropriate for them? Are they sullen? Watching for physical signs, because little kids and bigger kids often express worries physically. Are they having changes in appetite and sleep or headaches? Are there emotional outbursts? And of course, all kids and teenagers have that emotional outburst periodically. That's a part of learning how to regulate feelings and emotions. But are these happening more? And what's the language around that? Are they talking, and are there thoughts that penetrate about doom of the world? And one of the things that I think is important in the surveys that have been done that have identified these big feelings for teens is that it wasn't surprising for me to know that teens have these extensive big feelings, but they said that it interferes with their daily functioning. And that's something for the grown-ups, that parent club, to watch for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really significant. It's more than a fleeting thought you have.
Yes.
So once you recognize these challenges in a student or a child in your life, what would you recommend as a next step?
Again, curiosity is always the driver. Validating their fears. As I said, my dad didn't do that. Yes, this is something of concern that I have too. Honesty, but honesty in modulating what is tolerable to their emotional capacities, and not assuming that we can burden kids with carrying this. And then, always, I am with you. I am here to do everything I can to make you safe, to make the world that you're going to inherit be better. And I think it's important for the parent club to model ways of engaging in activism and action. And so that activism and action for grown-ups can be very different. I spoke to a friend last night wondering how his 12-year-old grandson could tolerate it. His grandson always sees their engagement in activism as a guide. And then joining kids in what they can actually do. What's happening in the clubs in your high school? How can I help you with that? Do you need me to drive you to those events? Can we go together, littler kids or even teenagers? Let's sit down and write a letter now to one of the people who has power here, our legislators, our leaders. We can do that together.
How might a teacher's role differ from a parent?
Really good question. First off, I think teachers are heroes here. It's really important to integrate climate literacy in teaching kids and have that interspersed in appropriate ways throughout their curriculum. And teachers, however, I think have the difficult task of appropriately providing information, but not ignoring that the content they're teaching can be very, very stressful, for making room in the classroom and outside of the classroom to identify upset feelings, to validate them, to say, this is tough stuff, and as we learn it together, you're going to have big feelings. And let's make sure that we have room to make sure that those are also something that we pay attention to. Helping kids with those skills. I think it's pretty common now for kids to learn about emotional regulation through deep breathing. Mm-hmm. It sometimes sounds corny, but let's breathe together because it helps to settle our emotional places in our brain so we can learn this stuff together. And then again, the same eyes on kids who are having more severe difficulties and might need additional help.
Robin Cooper is co-founder and president of Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us on Climate One and sharing these excellent tips. Coming up, a teacher responds to her students' curiosity about the state of our Earth.
They do want to know more about how the mechanisms of the planet are working, and then, how is this being disrupted?
That's up next when Climate One continues.
In California, the Oakland Unified School District is working to reduce their climate-harming emissions by switching to electric school buses. Electric buses also improve public health, and they'll help the district save money in the long run. But projects like these have run into trouble with the recent changes to federal funding. KALW climate reporter Mary Catherine O'Connor went to Oakland Unified School District to see these new school buses firsthand.
It's 7:30 on a Friday morning, and I'm in deep East Oakland with Mateo Hernandez. He's really into my microphone.
My name is Mateo. I want to play my name title.
His mom, Lisbeth Zamora, is here too.
Mateo's 7 and he's in first grade.
First grade, okay.
We're waiting for the school bus while Mateo chats away.
Teacher here. I want to play outside and outside.
He's been riding the bus since he was in preschool.
But back then, he didn't seem to enjoy it. His autism makes him sensitive to loud noises and smells.
In the beginning, he would say it was loud and cover his ears.
And even Lisbeth noticed the heavy exhaust when she walked him to the bus.
And I don't know, sometimes I would get a little headache.
But that all changed this fall when a new bus started rolling up. Gone are those fumes and the noise. I didn't even notice it approach, but Mateo spotted it.
Yeah, the bus is here.
As the door closes and they pull away from the curb, it sounds more like a spaceship than a school bus. That's because it's powered by batteries, not diesel. Lots of school districts across the country have 1 or 2 electric buses, but Oakland is a different story.
The Oakland Unified School District made history today.
The first school district to swap all of its school buses to electric models.
This is a really interesting development.
Huge leap forward for an East-based school district.
Oakland Unified now has 74 electric buses. I spoke with the district's transportation director, Kim Rainey. She told me the buses lower emissions and they better support the 1,300 students with special needs who ride the bus. And she says the diesel ones just didn't serve them well.
And they're riding on a noisy bus, which already amps a lot of special needs kids up. You're smelling the diesel coming in, the fumes. It's hot, it's louder, it's noisy.
Here's what it sounds like inside a diesel bus. And to compare, this is one of Oakland's new buses. But there's a catch.
Bus cost, especially in EV, is about $300,000. A regular bus, engine bus, is about $125,000 to $150,000.
That's a big difference, around twice as expensive. Plus, districts need to install charging stations, and that pushes the cost to switch even higher. But Laura Dehan, the state director for Environment California, says the extra cost is worth it.
The diesel fumes can cause respiratory ailments. It's also been linked to impacts to the brain now, and including ADHD and other behavioral issues. The idea that children with their developing lungs and their bodies that are so much more vulnerable to the impacts of exposure to pollutants, the idea that they would be exposed to that level of pollution every day while they're waiting at the bus stop or riding the bus is just absurd when we have alternatives. Clean electric school buses that can transport children safely without that pollution.
It's dangerous for drivers, too. Diesel exhaust can worsen asthma and is even linked to cancer and heart disease. And it's not just that these buses are no longer powered by fossil fuels.
One thing that's unique about school buses is that they're really not being used at all after school hours. And so you can then basically plug into that battery potential power, and it can help meet the electricity needs of the community.
So when, say, the electricity demand spikes on a hot summer day, the buses can provide power, sending it back to the grid. Plus, electricity is a much cheaper fuel than diesel, and these electric buses have far lower maintenance costs. That could save Oakland up to $440,000 a year. But the upfront price tag is steep. Oakland's fleet and charging infrastructure reportedly cost north of $50 million over 5 years. Now, the school district isn't on the hook for the whole amount. Here's Laura again.
California's been a major recipient of the federal funds that have come through the federal infrastructure law, and that's been great.
President Biden's Clean School Bus program set aside $5 billion for electric buses. School districts around the country have already received $1 billion of that, and another $2 billion was on the way. But when President Trump came into office, he directed the Environmental Protection Agency to freeze that money. Since then, the money has been released. But Sue Gander of the DC-based Electric School Bus Initiative says the delays caused damage.
It's put a lot of strain on school districts. It's put a lot of strain on dealers, and it puts a lot of uncertainty on the manufacturers who are looking to build out their production line, not to mention the kids who are missing out on these cleaner and quieter rides to school.
There's also that other $2 billion in the Clean School Bus program, but the EPA hasn't said when or if school districts will ever see that money. And they declined our request for an interview. Here in California, the state has invested more than $1 billion in clean school buses. But most school districts are a long way off from having fully electrified fleets. In Oakland, Kim Rainey told me the quiet, cleaner rides are already paying off. She's getting fewer reports of bus-related incidents. And back with Mateo at the bus stop, his mom, Lisbeth, says she's seen an improvement too.
Yeah, in general, he's doing much better. He participates more. His speech is also getting better. And he's more social.
In Oakland, I'm Mary Catherine O'Connor.
Mary Catherine O'Connor originally reported that story for KALW Public Media. Earlier, we heard a couple of students who shared their thoughts and feelings about the climate crisis. They go to Piedmont High School in Oklahoma. Melissa Lau, their environmental science teacher, told me about how a trip to the Arctic changed the way she thinks about climate.
So in 2018, I worked with a research team from Florida International University. I was there for 36 days. The team was there for longer.
36 days. That is.
Yeah.
That's a long trip.
It's a
in
long
the Arctic.
trip. My husband was home alone a lot. So, yeah, the first 2 weeks, I was in the northernmost point of the state. It was snowing every day. So didn't see any plants because they were under the snow. But then we went to Tulip Field Research Station, which is, still well above the Arctic Circle. What I saw, though, was as it got warmer, we would go out to the different sites to collect the data. And, you could see the permafrost slumps, as the permafrost is also warming up and melting, you have it'll slump down. You could see the methane bubbles in the lakes. I saw all of these things firsthand that I was, seeing and hearing about, in news stories and things like that. And that to me, like, it made it real. It
hit you.
Yeah, like this is urgent. Like, this is happening right now. There are villages in Alaska at that time in 2018 and still that, are having to move further inland. Like, we already have climate change migrants within the United States. Like, these are US citizens. This is not something that's happening far away. This is in our backyard. This is happening here.
How did that experience change you?
I was teaching 6th grade science at the time, and, we would talk about environmental things, ecology and things like that as part of our content. But I realized at that point, like, I can't be not it wasn't not wishy-washy, but it was more like I need to be more straightforward with my students. Like, I just need to tell them this is what's happening and this is happening now and it's us and it's real, but we can do something about it. So it changed my messaging that I was having in the classroom. Instead of, allowing some misconceptions, I just, like, I'm not going to fight that battle. Like, I'm not going to go there if this student does not think that climate change is happening and it's human and anthropogenic and in cause. I'm not going to fight that battle. It's just not worth it. It's worth it. It became worth it. So I had to start figuring out, how am I going to do this in a non-confrontational way? Living in Oklahoma, you can run into some conflict, considering that agriculture and fossil fuels are two major industries in our state, and those are two big human-caused drivers of climate change. It can get touchy. It can get a little sticky. So how do I do that?
Your school year just started, right?
Yes, we're on day 4.
What's the first unit?
So it's ecosystems, and then we start getting into, how humans are influencing these systems. But the very first activity we do is called Tragedy of the Commons, and that's day 1. They don't know each other. They don't really know me. So we're doing Tragedy of the Commons, where they are, fishing for goldfish out of a paper bag. And the first round, there's no talking, and of course, so and so, like, they took all the fish and now our lake is, there's no more fish in our lake. And I'm like, oh, that's a bummer. It's almost like I designed it that way. And then the second round, we start getting into, like, okay, so let's talk about strategies that you might use. And so we have this conversation. Then we talk about, what are these common resources that we all share. We talk about public parks and, even like the restrooms in our high school, that's a commons. If it belongs to nobody, then nobody is taking care of it.
And as we talked before, I used to teach high school math, so I get a little bit about what it's like talking to students and parents and everybody. And I know that the scrutiny teachers receive seems like it's, like, grown, especially since the pandemic. And like you said, you live in Oklahoma, state that votes Republican. Each of the 3 presidential elections passed, and even before then, I imagine that a teacher in your position might be shy talking about climate change, but you're not. Why?
There's several reasons. I was lucky enough to to get into contact with NCSC and started working with them. The biggest hurdle that I was having was trying to find lessons to teach.
And that's the National Center for Science
Yes,
Education.
thank you.
Right?
So it's the National Center for Science Education. And so like they were just starting to develop lessons, and I thought that's what I want to get in on. There are great repositories, like the Clean Network is a great website, but it's huge, it's massive, and it's like, where do I begin? How do I even start? So that was the first obstacle that I had to overcome, was to become more confident in just the content, and where do I start and how do I break this down to, at the time that I was teaching 11-year-olds, and now I'm teaching high school. So how does that look in the classroom? And then the second obstacle, I think, was administration support. I had to go to my administrators and say, hey, I'm getting ready to do this lesson. I think the students are going to be fine. And it's usually the students are fine with handling those kind of sticky topics. But, going to the administrators and trying to be respectful of them and saying, hey, I'm telling you, this is what's happening. This is the lesson that I'm doing. And this is the standard it's addressing. I just wanted to give you a heads up in case, you got a phone call or you got an email from a parent, that you're not blindsided by this. So trying to establish that. And I've been very lucky that my administrators are like, go for it, do it. You're good. You're good.
How about your students? So tell me a little bit about your students. How are they with learning about this? And how's it changed? How's it
Yeah,
changed over the
so
past,
it has
even
changed. I mean, even like within the last 5-6 years, there's just been this shift of, you're not seeing the denial so much within students. You'll see that more with adults, but not so much with my students. They're fairly fairly much in agreement that there's something going on, and there's we need to do something about this. It's the matter of urgency that they might feel about the situation. And that is I think the shift. I'm not seeing as much resistance as maybe I am seeing reluctance to get started, and that could be because they don't see the connection directly to their lives and how it's directly affecting them. Being a landlocked state, we don't see sea level rise. We don't see those kinds of changes. We're not hit with hurricanes. We have our own issues, but it's typically drought. And so if you're living, I mean, we've got plumbing and running water. And so that just doesn't really seem to affect us.
when you say getting started, what do you mean getting started on what?
To feel like that there is an urgency to take action, that there is something that we need to do. It's like, oh, well, this is a nice story. Thank you for sharing. But so like, there's not that urgency of there needs to be action. The other thing that you see is just a lot of anxiety. So some of the apathy is not necessarily just because they don't care, but it's just because it's like, I don't know where to start. It's overwhelming. It is difficult for them emotionally to have to, like, this is just how it is. And it's doomsday, and, there's nothing we can do. It's just all over.
Like a resignation,
Yeah.
kind of. It's interesting you bring up that difference. I think that's really key there. How the students, it sounds like they're facing this crisis of what can I do about it, and the pushback that you're talking about kind of sounds like it comes more from adults than it does from kids generally. So thinking about those two, how do you navigate tackling that difference, but also just those different offerings in your work? Like, I imagine relationship building must be really big.
Yes, that is the key. I mentioned relationship building with my administrators, so that they knew that I wasn't trying to throw them under the bus, but also with my students, and with their families. My family benefits from the fossil fuel industry. I have family members that work for fossil fuel companies. I have family that have mineral rights, and so they get drilling benefits from the fossil fuel industry. I share that with my students. I'm not coming at a place of where I'm trying to demonize what your family is doing to put a roof over your head and to put food on your table. That's not the problem. Your parents aren't the bad guys, right? That's not the issue. But just trying to establish that relationship with them, that I'm going to take you on a journey of, like, shifting a paradigm. And that takes some trust. I mean, humans are not just going to jump in feet first with somebody that they don't trust, that they don't believe has their best interest at heart, they would think that there's some sort of ulterior motive. So building those relationships is key, but also with the parents, just so that they are aware that, like, I am not coming at this at a place of conflict. I'm coming at this from a place of care.
And every year you have to rediscover and re-engage in that trust building.
100%. Even though I might know some of the students because, passing periods, and maybe I had them in my chemistry class and now they're in my environmental science class. You have a new combination of students and that completely changes the dynamic from 1 hour to the next. And so you really have to spend time getting to know those kids and how they work together as a unit.
So let's talk about the kids a little bit more, just because you've been teaching for 26 years, right?
Yes.
So compare that to like when you first started. How are the students different? Do they have more of an appetite for learning about the climate? Less? Is it every student's different?
Every student is different, but I do see more curiosity than I have in the past. They do want to know more about how the mechanisms of the planet are working, and then like how is this being disrupted. Whether or not they're coming with that conscious thought process, that's what they're wanting to know. How's it supposed to work? And then now, how is it different? Because it's difficult in this day and age. It's getting more and more difficult with AI and with social media platforms. There's just a lot of mis and disinformation out there, and it's just pervasive.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, when I was a teacher, social, even back then, played a big deal in my classroom. But the disinformation thing, I think, is so key.
That mis and disinformation, the cell phones it becomes more and more a part of their lives. They're more and more, engaging with technology than they are with each other. And the more that you're engaging in technology, the more you're exposed to these platforms and the avenues of which this information is disseminated.
Well, and I think this leads into what you brought up with the National Center for Science Education. Can you tell me a little bit about that work, how you're supporting teachers who are trying to navigate a lot of the same challenges you're talking about in the classroom?
Yes. So we have completely free and available and vetted lessons for teachers, but the approach of every single lesson, it's misconception driven, but it is also non-confrontational, like no conflict is the goal with all of these lessons. It is just simply, here is the information, and it's through a series of discoveries and discussions that students are coming to the conclusions themselves. The teacher at no point is ever saying, this is what is happening and this is what you must think. It's very no conflict and very student driven. And so, we've worked really hard with that. And the lessons were all developed by teachers that were, we know what our colleagues are dealing with. If you don't have the support of your administrators, if you don't have the support of your community, you still use these lessons because of the way that they're written, that you could still get this message out to your students and the information and the education out to your students with it being non-confrontational.
What kind of change are you hoping to see through that work? Tell me about what your vision for the future is, kind of.
Yeah, my hope is, yes, the more teachers that we can equip and empower with the resources that they need, and then the more students are then equipped and empowered with the information that they need as they move forward into becoming, citizens in our communities. And to have a scientifically literate electorate is ideal, because that's really what we're needing here.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a very enriching course, obviously, and wishing you the best of luck with the rest of the school year.
Yeah.
And thank you for your work. Melissa Lau is a high school environmental science teacher from Piedmont, Oklahoma. Melissa, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was nice to talk with you.
And that's our show. Thanks for listening. You can see what our team is reading by subscribing to our newsletter. Sign up at climateone.org.
Climate One is a production of the Commonwealth Club. Our team includes Greg Dalton, Brad Marshland, Jenny Park, Ariana Brocious, Austin Colon, and Megan Basilia. Our theme music is by George Young, and I'm Kushan Avidar.